With us now, Congressman Kevin Cramer is joining us from our Bismarck studio live. Congressman Cramer, as always, thank you so much for taking some time, sir, and joining us. I want to jump right in here for time's sake.
Sure.
What did you learn from that interview with Mr. Doug Burgum there, if anything?
Well, I don't know that I learned anything, although I will tell you that he was better at answering short questions than I thought he might be with the short answers, and that was encouraging. I also learned that I look forward to, if he ever becomes governor, the new dress code in the Capitol. That'll be kind of nice. But I thought it was a very good interview, frankly, and I thought he did very well, as did you. But you always do.
Well, thank you for that, sir. One thing I will ask you, because I know you are a very pro-life person. When I asked him, hey, pro-life, pro-choice, he said neither. Your thoughts on that?
I think that's an inadequate answer, frankly. And I know he wants to avoid labels, but with conviction come labels. And I know, as he said, it creates divisiveness. Perhaps it does. But, you know, the founders were not neutral on a lot of things, and I don't think people in politics should be either. My advice to Doug would be as transparent as you can be. People will honor your transparency more than they will your elusiveness on issues. That's why I think, frankly, I love what's happening. I think Doug is great for this race, just as Rick Becker's good for it, and of course Wayne Stenjum. They're all great candidates. I think this is a grand opportunity to have a wonderful statewide debate, which is carried out in a number of forms. But I think there ought to be one. Maybe you could host one on statewide TV.
Oh, you know what? You are reading my mind, Congressman. We are working on that as you speak. So well done, sir. And I agree with you. I think this is going to create a giant tent, obviously, for more and more people to get actively engaged in this process, which, as you and I both know, is so important. Let's move on to some issues for yourself, sir. Today, the Senate took a vote on the SAFE Act, which, if I screw this up, please help me out. But essentially, it allowed the FBI to do a more strict screening process on refugees coming into this country. I want to share with you a quick clip, sir, give you my comment and give you a chance to comment. This is from our Washington, D.C. Bureau, doing a story about the SAFE Act going down in the Senate today.
The SAFE Act would have made the FBI take all actions necessary to ensure anyone traveling from Syria or Iraq received a background check before being admitted to the U.S.
Congressman, here's my question for you, sir. So the Senate Dems say no to background checks on people from Syria and Iraq, who we know obviously are very high with ISIS and whatnot, and yet the president and Democrats want to expand background checks on law-abiding Americans for guns. Your comments on what's going on here?
Well, I think you've teed it up just perfectly. Now, we want to be fair. The House passed the SAFE Act with a veto-proof majority, which means a whole bunch of Democrats voted with a whole bunch of Republicans on it, which makes it all the more peculiar that Senate Democrats filibustered this, and I suspect they did it to protect the president from a tough decision of vetoing or not. But why they would do it is beyond me, except that they want to protect the president. But you're right, it is ironic, and it's an irony that needs to be pointed out, that, you know, it's not that anybody's calling for no refugee resettlement. We're just saying pause in in Iraq and Syria. We know that the Islamic State has exploited the refugee resettlement program. We know, in fact, that some of the terrorists in Paris came through that resettlement program. So it's prudent to do it. Plus, I would also add this. We can be as compassionate as ever, even more compassionate, by setting up refugee resettlement in the Middle East, perhaps even in Syria, in certain safe places where the U.S. can take the lead, be as compassionate, be as generous as we've always been, and frankly keep those people closer to their home, which is where they'd rather be in the first place.
Well, and I bring up the gun piece in this context. Attorney General Loretta Lynch came out today and said this, and I quote, "I have complete confidence that the common sense steps announced by the president are lawful," referring to his executive actions about gun control. She says they're well-reasoned measures well within existing legal authorities built on work that's already underway. Is she getting this correct from a legal perspective?
I don't believe she is, Chris. And here's the main case as far as I'm concerned, and that is that they have announced that they're going to adjudicate or promulgate new rules regarding certain Social Security recipients who use who may have a fiduciary or some sort of advisor that handles their finances for them, and that they would categorize them as too mentally unstable to have a gun. Well, you don't get to just qualify people that way. The default is the Constitution, which guarantees the right. You have to adjudicate if you want to take away that right. You don't do it the other way around. I think that's unconstitutional, and it's very problematic. And it is, in fact, a new rule. I know that the Fargo Forum took a swat at me saying that he didn't announce any new rules. Well, he did announce new rules, a pretty severe one that presumes you don't have a right. To a gun, and I think that's a pretty big problem.
It just stuns me that they don't want to expand or have more complete background checks on Syrians and people of Iraq, but they want to do it to law-abiding Americans. It's just shocking to me. Let's move on to the Grand Forks Air Force Base. The day of the State of the Union, which I believe was last week, maybe 2 weeks ago now, you sat down with people from the White House, Department of Defense, Health and Human Services. How did that conversation go, number one? And if you're not going to put them at the Grand Forks Air Force Base or other Air Force Base, what's your solution, obviously, for these illegal, unaccompanied minors?
Well, great question, Chris, because we do need to have a solution, and I just think it's not compassionate to send a bunch of unaccompanied kids from Guatemala and Honduras and El Salvador to Grand Forks in the middle of the winter, 1,500 further miles away from their home. And that's why in last year's omnibus spending bill, we put funds adequate to build facilities at the border itself, funds adequate to beef up the immigration courts so that they could process the children quicker and get them back home with their parents. But in the meantime, if there are facilities needed, first of all, I would look closer to the border than Grand Forks, North Dakota. Secondly, I actually presented some alternatives. As a result of the downturn in the oil economy, there are a number of crew camps that are available, that turnkey operations, not necessarily in North Dakota or just in North Dakota, but in Texas, New Mexico, other oil-producing areas that are much closer to that border that I think would be a bargain. If you've ever been into one of these crew camps, you know how nice they are, and I think it'd be a better bargain for the taxpayer, more humane for the children, and I think a much more suitable solution. But that said, to their credit, because I sent this letter to HHS, the White House reached out to me immediately. They brought two representatives from each of the two agencies as well as the White House to talk about it. I felt much better when we were done discussing it. That said, I still oppose the idea, even under the conditions that they've outlined, which are pretty modest.
Well, and we reached out to the Deputy Secretary at HHS. She's freshly from North Dakota. We have not been able to get a hold of her, but are you getting a sense that these unaccompanied minors are not going to end up at the Grand Forks Air Force Base, or is that still a possibility?
Yeah, I'm not getting that sense, Chris. It's still a possibility. They wouldn't rule that out, even against my strong objection, and I certainly feel like they need to get strong local support for it. You're only talking at Grand Forks perhaps up to 300 children. They average a stay of about 32 days. The whole thing would be 60 to 90 days. That said, again, I still oppose it on the grounds that I've already spoken about, but I don't get the sense that they're willing to sort of write it off, but they certainly know of our strong objection to it.
Congressman Cramer, well, last question for you, sir. I want to see if you're in support of this. I'm sure you're aware of the raids that are going on right now with the Obama administration for illegal immigrants, for ones that have already have outstanding deportation orders. Just in the last month, they've now apprehended 121 Central Americans. Do you support this kind of program where they're going in and basically raiding neighborhoods and homes?
Well, Chris, this is a little bit of the problem, isn't it? That they don't do anything for so long. They have this amnesty program that's now been, shut down by one judge. Then an appellate court shut it down even further, and now it's going to the United States Supreme Court with their amnesty overreach. And then all of a sudden they come in and do these raids. If you have a consistent enforcement policy, you have a much better case, and you create a greater incentive for people to not come here illegally rather than what he's doing. It's so confusing. Now, that said, do I support it? Yeah, I'd say it's about time, but I don't think it has to be as dramatic or as extreme as it is, and it wouldn't have to be. If we consistently enforce the laws as they are, we would have a much more peaceful situation.
Well, and unless my last comment, Congressman, I got to let you go, but I think what's shocking, a study came out today from the Center for Migration Studies. For the first time in over a decade now, illegal immigrants are below the 11 million mark in the United States, according to the studies. So they're saying essentially that, hey, illegal immigration is actually decreasing, again, according to this study. Congressman Kevin Cramer, we always appreciate your time, sir. Look forward to having you back on in the near future. And maybe you can help us out with this gubernatorial debate, okay?
I'm all for it, man. Let's be as transparent as we can. You know, that's where you and I live.
I know. Thank you very much, sir. Stay with us when we come back. Much more coming up on 630 Point of View. Would love to know your point of view. Immigration, Grand Forks Air Force Base, Mr. Burgum's interview, Congressman Cramer. Let us know. We'll be right back.